Hello and welcome to The Magic in You, where I am here with Louise Hewett, who is a mother, author, visual artist, and has been on a goddess-feminine path for over 30 years. Originally finding women's spirituality after a spiritual crisis and paradigm shift when her first child was diagnosed with a fatal heart defect soon after birth. Louise was later introduced to ecofeminism and the concept of goddess at the Sophia Centre here in Adelaide, South Australia. Her journey has taken her into witchcraft, critiquing patriarchal spirituality that is found within mainstream religion, the New Age, mythology in general, and exploring the work of social systems scientists and cultural historian, now I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Renee Elsler. Quite sure you'll correct me in a moment, Louise, when I bring you onto the screen. Anyway, this has led Louise to commence writing her Pictish Spirit novel series, which started in 2011, and some 14 years later, she is writing the last of what has become a 7-part book series, and can't wait to be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. So I'm just going to bring you onto the screen, Louise, and so welcome to be talking about the magic in you.
Thank you, Frances. Thank you for having me.
More than welcome. Now, I did touch very briefly on your background, but I thought it might be interesting for our viewers or our listeners to know more about your path from you, especially your interest in ecofeminism and how that has revealed this sort of patriarchal influence that we may not be oblivious to, or we might be actually oblivious to, that underpins a lot of our modern world, including our spirituality today. Can you explain a little bit more?
Well, I'm just have to trudge back through the years here. It's early in the morning, so yes, I had my first child, and he had a heart defect. So that really broke open a lot of my beliefs at the time that were already sort of on the rocks, I should say. I was brought up in the Anglican Church, but not strictly as a child, just, the sort of general cultural atmosphere, occasionally going to Sunday school, that kind of thing. But in my teens, I did get more involved in the church, looking for a accepted spiritual path because I was uh, dabbling in ideas from Eastern spirituality, and even just interest in ancient Egypt and gods and goddesses was very frowned upon by my family. So Christianity was the easy spiritual path because it was so common in the culture. So when my son was born, he had a problem with his heart that was very dire. He wasn't going to survive. So that really shattered everything. It just was one of those things that made me question everything. And it was a couple of years. No, it wasn't even a year, I think. I became involved with Sophia Centre doing circle dance. And there they had, more of a focus on women in the church, but also just women's spirituality. And I met a few women there. And also they had a little library in the center. So I was exposed to some new and exciting ideas, and that really just helped shatter um, that final shattering of the past paradigm that I'd operated under. And while I was there, I did a couple of courses, writing mainly, because I'm a writer. And I did a course with a woman who's still about, I believe, Jenny Whiteman. And she was interested in, or she introduced the subject of not only women's spirituality and questioning theology from a women's and feminist perspective, but also the ecofeminism. And, you know, I think I've still got somewhere the photocopied sheets that she gave out, because this was back in 1994, 5. So it's a fair while ago now. And I just, you know, latched onto it because I had an interest in the symbolic and I wouldn't say religion, but why we have those impulses. You know, it was all very cloudy at that time, but that interest had been there since I was a child, actually. So I attended a couple of these writing workshops and presented some poetry and some writing for criticism, which was very scary. And you know, those things of having questions asked about why did you write that? Why is your main character, you know, either, you know, female or male? Why did you choose that? And I was just like, oh, I don't know why, you know. So I had to, I was obviously confronted on some level, but I just did think about it, and I started to investigate and read books that I didn't know existed for a start. And it just opened up the can of worms, so to speak. And the ecofeminism was a part of that whole sort of introduction to earth-based spirituality, the pagan umbrella. For me, in the beginning, it was more like women's spirituality, and the couple of books I got hold of were more what you might call feminist witchcraft, although I don't even know if that's a category. But back in those days, I think it was more under the label of women's spirituality. And again, very hard to get hold of information, just possibly because of my background. And I just didn't know even that there were bookshops in Adelaide. And then I moved, after my son's heart was taken care of, he had surgery as a baby. We moved to live at Semaphore, and there was a great little feminist bookshop, a women's bookshop, Sisters by the Sea, which I believe is not there now. But they had some fascinating books. And one of them that I bought the early days was a Rianne Eisler. That was the system scientist you mentioned. Rianne Eisler's book, The Chalice and the Blade, which I think is fairly well known. People probably heard of it. And Mary Condren's book, The Serpent and the Goddess. That was a big influence, particularly because she was talking about Christianity and the Irish Church, and the kind of ousting and erasure of the image of the goddess or the symbol of the divine female, whatever you want to call it. And that was, even at that point, I was like overwhelmed because didn't have enough grounding to really appreciate it, but I did appreciate it. And so it all tied in. So the sort of ecofeminism was sort of that trying to unearth, for me, in my mind, the female perspective. Not just think that we're all the same, which is the masculinist kind of narrative, that the male narrative has been, oh, we speak for women too. It's all one, you know, we're human. But it's actually a particular narrative. So that was really crucial to understand for me. But it did take some years to really get it in my head. But that was then looking at the earth-based spiritualities. You know, it's like at first I just jumped in and didn't question anything because I thought, oh, this is different. This is the alternative. This is all rosy pie. But of course, very quickly I realized it's not true. and that there were all the sexual politics, which was another subject that came up out of that, the ecofeminism, the women's spirituality, the analysis of Christianity, it didn't take much to show that, there was sexual politics between men and women going on, and it had been going on thousands of years. So the other book of Rianne Eisler's that was really influential was The Sacred Pleasure, which was about myth, power, and sexual politics. So that was the subject that I was really realized, this is what I'm interested in, because it kind of brought everything together. The way, the earth has treated the environment. And I hadn't even learned anything about capitalism at that point. And how it all seems to come out in stories, just any story, books, movies, but the stories of the culture, and relationships. And so that was I was just so interested in all of that. And that was the beginning couple of years. That was, about 30 years ago. And it's just been that sort of inquiry constantly over the last 30 years, learning on the job, as I'd say that because I'm a mum and I've raised 4 kids. They're all official adults now, so it's not over yet, but that's why my hair's gone this color, But yeah, so it's a huge interconnected subject, and not very comfortable. A lot of the time, it's very distressing. Another reason why the hair's gone that color.
And the sad thing too is like, you're talking about your journey that was back in the 90s, like around about the same time. I was sort of on the path as well, and I remember going down to Sophia Centre and also doing circle dancing, because this
Oh,
is what
right. We might have
originally
been there at the same time.
that was a women's dance, and it reminded me of folk dances we had to learn at school, which were,
Yeah.
you had square dances and things like that. But the sad thing is, like, what you're talking about, I'm looking around our world today going, here it is 30 years later, and still nothing much has changed. And I
No.
think that's really disheartening in a way. It's just like, if it was a scorecard, it's like, could do better. Human species could do better. But as you
Yeah.
said, there's this sort of an underpinning of the sort of patriarchal, the masculine viewpoint, that we often don't acknowledge, or it's been in our consciousness, as you said, from the ancient myths for so long, especially in the West, that we perceive it as our normal.
Yes, that's right. I think so. I think we don't. There's probably some saying, like, I remember hearing a saying once, says, if you know someone's asleep, or yourself asleep, wake them up. But often we just don't know. And I actually used that idea in an essay I wrote for the Sophia magazine, Sounding Sophia, the first offer I ever had of writing for a publication. I was really excited, but I did have that idea that I was asleep, um, because it's just so normal. It's taken for granted. And, Indigenous people and people of color would say the same thing about white people. They don't know from that perspective, because obviously we can't. But our perspective, we can have that empathy, because once upon a time in our own ancestral lands, we were in the position of, either being invaded, being enslaved, whatever, you could go back through time. And that's, to me, just a key thing to remember about having the empathy for other people's experiences. Because again, of course, in the West, we just take it for granted that our way of life is normal and good. And yes, it's very comfortable. I can't complain about, the comforts, but that's sort of missing the point in a way.
Yeah, and it's
because
almost like the comforts have come at an expense.
they have,
There's a
yeah,
cost, but we don't. Well, we've forgotten or we've been disconnected from that expense, which is the earth, our connection with the earth, because all
yeah,
these fancy, shiny new things, which we're getting more and more fancy, shiny new things out there,
yeah,
which is furthering disconnecting us from the earth, which is why I think,
yeah. Our relationship with which takes so much effort now because the aspiration to want to obviously respect and almost aspire to, Indigenous values, say, um, we are very limited in what we actually can do because of our way of life and because of our history and our consciousness because of that. Um, but even on that subject, as I'm learning, I mean, when I was young, I wanted to go to uni when I was at school and do things like philosophy, anthropology, archaeology. I was actually interested in everything, but I didn't end up going. I did English for a year, but anthropology has always fascinated me because it's about human beings. And I'm reading just as an armchair interest, books on anthropology at the moment. And particularly, I've selected ones that are biased towards a woman's experience for a start, menstruation, and the feminist take, which is very recent in the field. And it's all kind of, you know, fascinating to realize that even among tribal and indigenous people, there are so many different value systems and ways of shaping their social reality and their spiritual reality. um, that they're not a homogenous, you can't really say indigenous wisdom because I've read some books that are like, well, I'm sure that people wouldn't think that was a good idea. But on the other hand, some other tribe or group of people um, have got a brilliant sort of underpinning value. And I just kind of, again, I grieve that it's just for me anyway, for my particular life journey, it it's nothing I was exposed to when I was younger. If I'd gone to uni, I don't even know if I would have got the benefit of the information because the system, perhaps it was just changing back in the, hang on, when did I go to school? Yeah, so the previous decade in the 80s, the feminist movement was really starting to be attacked full bore in the 80s. So I don't know how beneficial a formal education would have been. I can't go back in time and take the alternative path. I just have to think, okay, well, this is where I am, and I'm going to just keep my eyes and ears open. But all of those themes that brought me to, I guess, again, the pagan path, the umbrella term, heathen. Heathen tends to have that real Northern Germanic vibe, but technically, I think they're similar. They mean the similar thing. Um, they're not the official state religion, in other words.
yeah,
um, but that has been a wonderful sort of land of its own to explore all these alternative ideas and see, as we mentioned, some of the patriarchal, or so people hate that word, I know, but they probably hate masculinist even more because it's somehow an attack on men, but it's not. It's another way of thinking, um, logic, I suppose, and that is, being able to learn how to see those things in mythology was always my interest because, again, as I said, my interest in mythology went back to I was primary school. My classmates gave me a big book, World Mythology, when I left their school. I was 12. Uh, and I thought, wow, how did they know?
yeah, we have a lot in common there because I've always been interested in myth, and I can remember back in the day when I was young, 'cause my mother was a librarian, and there was a gift to all myself and my siblings was this compendium of world myths, and there were
Yeah.
five or so different books. And I tend to recall
Wow.
that section or that box set always ended up in my room as opposed to in the main bookcase in
Yes.
the lounge room.
Yeah.
But yes, but I suppose what
Yeah.
you've been sort of talking about too, which leads me into promoting you in your writing work, is the Pictish Spirit series, which is unique. And you've been doing this now for over 10 years.
Yeah.
So 7 volumes. I mean, I just want, for those people who aren't familiar with it, each volume has actually been a substantial body of work on its own, if I
Yes.
could say myself.
Some people
Miss,
would say I can't stop talking
you have a
in
lot to
writing.
say. I mean, the first volume is Mist, which is some 1,200 pages. Then
I think it's actually the shortest book. About it's actually about 770.
and then
Uh,
there's I don't know if I've got these in order, but then there's Mist, then Wind,
yes.
Flowers, Storm, Ice,
Nice.
and River.
River. That's right.
So can you tell us a little bit, because it's a story that's going on through, you're taking people on a journey, a wonderful adventure, but also tapping into more than just the modern day. You're bringing in a lot of we're talking about the archaeological, the sacred stories, the
Yeah.
history, how we got to, especially in the Western culture, how we got to where we are today, and with the title being Pictish, I think that sort of leads to a certain part of the
Yeah.
world. So I'm just going to hand it
It
over.
does. It's such a huge thing, and I'll really try to be brief because I can just go off for hours, of course. Um, I'll start with the title Pictish. That was sort of late, that came late in the writing in terms of I'd written 2 books before I published Mist. But I was looking for a name, sort of an overall theme. And initially I had in my sort of scrapbook writing notebook, I'd written Celtic Spirit, as the sort of spiritual path. But I just thought that sounded really naff. And I thought, but it's the same sort of vibe. It's got a sort of an umbrella or you can't you think of something straight away. But because the characters of the four, I call them the four goddesses or mythic female figures that are really central to the story, uh, Bridget, Caliac, and the warrior women, I call, or martial teachers, Skaha and Aoife from the Isle of Skye, and the stories sort of around that. And that goes back to my friendship with Lynn, and you knew Lynn too, Lynn Wood, and some of the material from her novel. Her book. I've got novel on the brain now. I've got my copy here if you want me to hold it up. That was Lynn's book.
Yes, yes.
Um,
I was
and
just looking
she,
for my copy on my bookshelf, but it's in the other room. But yes,
yeah.
very
Well,
influenced.
in her workshops and just in friendship and conversations over a cup of tea, that was a big influence in. I can remember conversations where I just listened to her talk actually about her experiences with the Isle of Lewis and even just like going from her art school experiences, her the installations she would do, and then trips overseas, Scotland, Wales, and the stories, the women in Celtic myth, and which is basically the subject of her book. And so I chose those 4 women, Bridget and Caliac being common to both Scotland and Ireland. because the characters sort of are from Australia, England, Scotland, and Ireland in the story. And it was really a way for me to explore all of those things that I was interested in and try to write about it because I just love to write. But I wasn't, going to attempt anything as like in terms of essays or because I didn't have any academic background. But I was certainly interested in how I could express the ideas and play with possibilities. And so after I read Sacred Pleasure and The Chalice and the Blade, probably late 1990s, early 2000, and then I sort of incubated for 10 years, had 2 children in that time. But it was when my youngest was 4, I started to write. And it was like having a tap turned on. It just opened up the faucet and it just came out and it would not stop for a good, oh, 8 years. And then it started to get really hard. And it's agonizing now because I'm exhausted. But that Pictish part was to allude to I guess, what came before. And we don't know. There's probably no name for the Indigenous people of Scotland, certainly. Pictish was a sufficiently vague, I thought. And it wasn't to describe the Picts as such, but the Pictish, when we say Celtic, the idea of the artwork, the patterns, and a sense of something connected to the tradition, an older tradition of the land. And this is also fictitious in terms of me coming up with my idea. So that was where the name came from. But each novel, of course, it began as the elements, how we have earth, air, fire, and water. And I had read, I'm not even sure who had written it, but I'd read that there was the elements mist, wind, and flowers, which is the combination of other elements. Like mist is obviously water and air. Wind is, I guess, fire and air. The sun makes the wind and that sort of thing. So I thought, oh, I really like that idea. And Lynn's artwork that's on the front cover of Mist had that misty feel. It's got that sort of male and female, the labyrinth, and this kind of purpley mist that just was perfect for what I was trying to say, that we're trying to find out what's going on in the fog and make a path, which was the picture of the labyrinth, out of that confusion, but also following the path into the confusion. So it's that in and out journey. And so I just had this idea that if I could write about a group of people, a small group, because it's already complicated enough, trying to create a way of thinking and living that sort of is in harmony with their values as much as they can in the world, and explore through discussions within the group their ideas about the mythology, again, incorporating their values. The politics side of it isn't obvious in the book in terms of what's going on day to day. It's more those generalized sexual politics. And again, that was one of the big themes, which is in the mythology. And so Mist was really the experiment, I just got to do it, I'm just going for it. And I never thought it would be published or even that I could publish it. But I wrote it and then I continued on because I realized at the end that it wasn't finished. I had too much to say. I was also wanting to speak for my lineage, like my maternal lineage, my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, because all the way back um, throughout history, because they don't have a voice. They weren't important people in society. They were just saying this to my mum the other day. We don't get recorded unless we do something remarkable. Um, and not that we want to be recorded as such, but those perspectives and also the experiences which are really interesting, like how my grandmother coped during the Depression. Um, those things are not as easily to find. Well, I didn't find them easy, but I also talked to my grandmother. But I wanted to somehow record uh, a different perspective, so the women's perspective. So that's where I sort of was my dedication to women and specifically to all the interesting women that I'd met that sort of inspired me, including Lynn Wood and the authors that I'd read, like Riane Eisler, who was a Holocaust survivor. And she had some big questions to ask, and that's what prompted her work. And yeah, so I just began to write, and really I didn't even have a plan. I had a couple of characters, and the major thing that was going to be a bit different was the relationships. I thought that to tackle questioning the sort of mainstream narratives of marriage, male ownership of women in marriage, which is historical, that women weren't a legal entity when they married for a long time. And even my mother had to give up work when she got pregnant, when that was in the 60s, 1965. And I was like, what? I didn't know anything about that, but I did research that. And for a later novel. So I thought I want to write not only about women. There's a lot of, fantasy men. Some people think that they're complete fantasy, or maybe they are, because I'm trying to envision something very different. You have to be a bit brave. So the relationship that is a polyamorous relationship, but it's not just like a free-for-all type of thing. It's got structure and boundaries. And that was the key, is how you can change something and not just chuck everything out the window, but challenge the narrative of not only the heterosexual, but the monogamous or the ownership. The ownership was the key thing, the idea of and again, it may not be relatable to people in the modern world, but there is that historical sense of, which bleeds into the present, of when we marry, or even just have a relationship, we belong to that person. Nobody can touch you because you belong to someone else, or that's my property. Those are undertones that, again, may not be in current usage. Some people still believe that, I know that. But they were definitely part of history. And for women in particular, there is a huge mess of trying to untangle this kind of thing, that we are property, we have to perform, to be liked or loved or taken seriously or even listened to. And I just observe the world going on now, and I think it's still like that. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, even like in a marriage ceremony, a woman is given from the father to the husband to be. I mean, it might be symbolic, it might be just, but it's
what is it symbolic of?
Yeah, that you are a
of
chattel. You are
ownership.
something to be given away.
Yes,
And I know women are challenging at this stage, but there's almost still an expectation that you change your name to your husband's name. You
yes,
lose your identity. And I remember
yeah,
when so the
yes,
last American election, when Joe Biden was elected, his wife, Jill, she was a doctor. And people didn't like that idea. They didn't want to address her as Dr. Biden.
yeah,
Because she was,
yeah.
she earned the accolades herself.
Yeah. Well, I certainly found that. I mean, I went through a marriage ceremony when I was 20, and I did the whole traditional thing. I was going to obey my husband because I was fully in that mode of thinking at the time. So I know from the inside out sort of thing what that feels like. But then I questioned it, and I went the complete opposite. And a friend of mine was getting married way back. And I said to her, how can you have your father give you away? You are then saying, I'm his property, and I'm going now to a man who I'm marrying. And she was like, oh, no, no, no. It's just, it's about care and all this sort of thing. And I'm like, just, she's just willingly ignoring history. And that was one of the turning points, a very common, and, we were having coffee in a cafe. But it really hit me that she's not ready. She may never be ready. I was ready and I figured it out. Um, but not everyone's going to be ready or think it's a big deal. Because yeah, we've sort of softened, life has been softened for many of us by the freedoms that other women fought for. Again, that was one of the big lessons, that nothing that we have today came easily. And I think that that's what's going on with American women at the moment, seeing that their freedoms are at risk.
How
How
quickly
can
it is
that be?
to be taken away, how hard it was to
Yeah,
fought for, how easy it is to take
yeah.
away.
And I think that that's what I had to learn, just, because I was so insanely curious, and had no real mentorship. The only person who helped me was Lynn Wood. She told me, one of our first conversations, when we were first getting to know each other, I was saying, oh, I can't be spiritual. I'm a housewife. I've got kids and no one, it's not serious. I felt like I had to devote myself like a monk to this path. And she's like, that's bullshit, Louise. That's the male narrative, because men have traditionally walked off, gone and sat in a cave or whatever. But women have always had the babies, raised them on the whole, um, and you've internalized this story. And I was just like, oh my God, yes, I have. So she really helped me see that, and she didn't, pull any punches. She was just going to say, that's crap. Um, and, you know, she was very supportive though. You've got to try to remind yourself constantly that being in an organic environment, and what's more organic than, giving birth and raising kids, that honestly it's the most testing thing I have ever done, particularly with my two youngest, who are beautiful boys, but one's autistic and the other one had behavioral issues, and they have just pushed me to the limit. Um, but I'm a strong person, I think, and I have good sort of values where I have a vision, and that's helped me. Um, but in other circumstances, I can see how it can be, utterly destructive. So I have a great empathy for mothers who struggle, particularly single mothers, because I'm a single mother, have been for a long time. But in my novels, I explore these issues too, in terms of the bigger pictures. And again, I bring in mythology a lot. Sorry if I'm skipping around here,
No, that's fine. That's fine.
but the thing in the stories is that they have like a mentoring tradition, where they sit and discuss things. Um, with guidance, obviously it's hard in a book. You just got to make it general, and you've got to. My books are long, and I've tried to get a lot of meat in there, but it's a hard thing to balance. But they might discuss the big story that I chose because I really loved it. It was something that I'd been fascinated with since my early 20s, was the story of the Welsh story of Blodeuwedd, Math, son of Mathonwy, and the goddess or mythic woman, whatever you want to call her, Arian Rod and Blodeuwedd, and the previous woman, Goewin. And so that three women throughout that story, what happens to them? And Lynn was very pivotal in helping look at the woman's point of view. Instead of saying, oh, this is what happened, and Blodeuwedd was betrayed, this bloke, and he was killed, and she represents, whatever negative qualities she represents. Lynn was saying, well, what about what she went through? What did she go through? So I started to look from that point of view and write about it. And knowing all the time that it's mythology, so it's not just like a historical document, but looking at the sort of, the narratives that go along with that. For example, Arian Rod is told she's a wicked woman by her brother, Gwydion. And yet she has been trying to stick to what's possibly a previous, like, matri-centered tradition of the aunt or the mother giving the son permission or, status to marry, to get weapons, to, there's three things in the story that he has to get. But she gets in the way of Gwydion's schemes, but she's the wicked one. And when I read it, it just reminded me of the story of Adam and Eve again. Like, she's the one that's to blame. And, and then with Blodeuwedd, who betrays her husband, I thought, no, hang on a minute, let's look at this. She would have been a young girl, like a teenager, because she was young and beautiful, a fair maid, the fairest maid in all the realm, as they say. And then she was given to this bloke. She didn't have a say in it. She just was married off to him. And then she falls in love with someone else. And of course, she's in a pickle. And so is he. But, and she's all these little things, and the symbolism of she's enclosed in the castle, and when she's turned into the owl at the end of the story, she's cursed. And that was a big thing Lynn talked about, was that the curse was, women are not going to be in solidarity anymore. Her and her maidens are shattered. So women are at war with each other because the owl is a predatory bird. So it's a nocturnal bird. It's going to be at war with the other birds. So if you think of the birds as women, I'm not being trite in saying birds, then Blodeuwedd is set against them. That's the curse. And it was a curse that this magician, hurled at her. And you think, well, he possibly, this is my conjecture, in the context of a group of people discussing the idea, he possibly represents an incoming value system, and he's also perhaps a spin doctor. He's got the power in that society to make the narratives. So I was just going wild with this. but it just was so satisfying because even though it might not be the correct interpretation, I still think it had some value. And in the end, because years and years ago, Lynn often would say in a workshop, try and rewrite the story, give it a different, more perhaps positive ending, not necessarily happily ever after, but something a bit more creative, particularly for women. And so I did that in the third book, Flowers, which is named after Blodaiworth, who was Flower Face. So, so there's a lot of, I guess those books you have to
Intriguing.
think about them, you know.
There's a lot being woven in there
Yes,
as well, and it's not
yes.
just for women. There's a lot, as you said, there's understanding societies. There's a lot of information in there, as true myths are. It's like you look below the surface.
Hmm.
So,
And
unfortunately,
yeah,
Louise, we are running out of time.
of course.
This is such a huge subject
It is.
as well. But thank you very much. And you are on social media, and we haven't even talked about your poetry. We haven't even talked about your art. So you've got
No.
the Egg and Serpent Studio.
Yes.
You've got Pictish Spirit. These are both Facebook pages as well, and I'll put the links below. There's also Goddess-Feminism, the Maternal Gift Paradigm.
Yes, that's a whole other subject connected.
And also, and this is something else we haven't really got to, but we can see at the top of your bookcases behind you, the hearth of the antlered mother as well. So
Yes,
maybe we can sort of pick up our conversation at a later stage, because I'm quite sure this is going to sound really fascinating.
I
Uh,
hope so. Yeah.
and your books
Thank you,
are
Francis.
it's all right, and your books are available on Amazon, anywhere else, web
Um,
pages.
Possibly, but Amazon's probably, I have to say, and I know people dislike Amazon. I didn't know much about Amazon when I published my books. I didn't know that Amazon was the owner of the publisher. But they're the cheapest. In Australia, it's to buy from me. I still have to order my author copies, as you would probably know how that works.
Yeah,
Um, but that is one option, and then I can sign the book.
yeah, yeah.
But Amazon's probably the easy go-to
Especially
one.
for people
They're big,
outside of
they're big
Australia. Yeah.
books, and they weigh a lot, which is why they cost a lot to publish too, because there's lots of pages.
Because you have a lot to say, because
Yes.
there is the need for a lot to be said. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and I've been working through my own stuff, and you know, not everyone will like that because they like short and sweet, but that's not me. So
And not everything is instant either. And
no, it's not.
there's a
Yeah,
lot of, especially in this day and age, and this is something that I think a lot of us are becoming more and more aware of. There's so many layers. It's like
yeah,
we're doing our own archaeology, pulling back the
yeah,
layers of our society, the good,
yes.
the bad, and the ugly.
Hmm.
And sometimes we just need to face it. So
Yeah. Mm.
thank you very much for talking about the magic in you, Louise. And if
Thank you for
people
having me.
who want to learn more about your books, your artwork, all the links will be below.
Thank you.
I look forward to catching people again soon.
Yes. Yeah, it'd be good. Thank you.
Blessings.